This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Solutions, the leading iGaming PAM platform with a modular approach, including many benefits like a fast, secure, and scalable API-based platform, integrated with all major third-party products and services. Make sure you head over to Pragmatic Solutions and join our smart thinking.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this iGaming Next Marketing Podcast. Today we have a real treat for you as we have Katie Shaw from Entourage Global in the studio. We're going to talk about how to optimize your sponsorship strategy. So if you have ever thought about hiring Ronaldo or influencers or streamers or whatever it might be, this is definitely the episode for you. Katie has spent the last 14 years doing exactly this with brands ranging from PepsiCo to Ford to Vodafone, but also gaming brands such as Parimatch, Olibet, and a number of others. And in this podcast, she gives you all the good stuff. She shares what to think about, how to optimize it. So I strongly advise you to listen in. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening to this iGaming Next brand and marketing podcast. Today I'm super excited because I'm here with you, Katie. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks, Michael. Thank you.
You officially have the best looking living room I have ever had on this podcast, I think.
I'll take that. It's recently been decorated, so I think that it won't remain like this for much longer.
It shows. So for the listeners that are audio only, you're missing out. You should go and find the video version of this podcast. Katie, you're based in London, right?
Yes, correct.
And how's the weather on this lovely Wednesday afternoon?
Cloudy and miserable, but I feel like it's starting to warm up, so I'm taking that and feeling like spring is on its way.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I'm based in Malta. Same here. Spring is definitely in the air. About 20 degrees. It's good. We're getting there.
Okay, that sounds much better.
Yeah, exactly. Katie, we have a fantastic conversation coming up here around sponsorships, really, which you are definitely a massive expert in. So I'm super excited about that. Before we start, super excited. You told me during the prep call that you are very soon about to have not one, but two, so twins, basically, soon in a couple of weeks. Is that correct?
That is, yeah. I was just explaining to Michael that I've been feeling a bit run down, but I was like, we've got to do the podcast today because the twins are coming soon, so we can't delay it. But yes, I am, expanding the family. So a busy couple of months ahead, but looking forward to it.
Wow, and twins and everything. I first of all, massive congrats, and yeah. So that probably means when this podcast comes out, you'll probably be listening to it if you have time with two extra little ones running around.
Yeah, it might help my voice might help send the twins to sleep, so it could be useful.
Exactly. Very good. Cool. But let's get into it. So first of all, brief introduction to you, Katie. So you're currently heading up Entourage Sport and Entertainment's recently launched partnership management division. You bring with you 14 years of experience in partnership marketing and sponsorship management. Prior to joining Entourage, your career spans companies such as Fuse, which is part of Omnicom, Carrot Sponsorship, which is part of Dentsu, and Prism, which is part of WPP, working with a number of global brands to maximize their sponsorships, such as PepsiCo, Ford, Vodafone, as well as gaming brands such as PokerStars, Sky Betting and Gaming, Parimatch, and Olympic Entertainment Group, or Olibet. Did I get that roughly correct, or did I completely destroy that?
No, that's all correct. Yeah, and
right.
Yeah, it's definitely been with Entourage that I've been working increasingly with gaming brands. Entourage is an independent agency that's about 8 years old, but we work very well with gaming brands because we can be quite agile, react quite quickly, and that seems to kind of complement the way that gaming brands like to work as well.
Yes, exactly. Very good. So quite some big names happening there, both inside and outside gaming, and 14 years here, Katie. So I'm super excited to talk about this topic with you. But we normally start with sort of a round of definitions because we're dealing with marketing, and there's so much lingo and different definitions floating around in the air. So what does the word sponsorship mean to you, Katie? How would you describe it?
So sponsorship is really just another form of marketing. It's when, a brand or a company might pay to be associated to something else. And by being associated to it, they get, a number of rights and they get used to their IPs. So they can use their name, their logo, their image as a way in which to kind of draw that association between them and that property. And, really sponsorship's been around for ages. I think there are articles talking around how wealthy individuals used to kind of pay to sponsor gladiator races, and obviously it's developed quite a bit since then. But that kind of, it kind of really kicked off in kind of late 19th century with tobacco cards, which collectibles are still obviously huge now, especially in the digital space. But tobacco cards became these collectible items because they were using sports stars in them. Then in sort of 28, Coca-Cola established their sponsorship with the Olympics, which is incredible because it's still going. But that's, the first kind of real sponsorship that I think we see nowadays as well. And it's just been growing since, and especially with, broadcasts happening in sort of 1950s, I think it was, that just allowed access to a huge audience. And that's what brands are looking to do, is sponsor certain things to capitalize on, that association and that audience. And I think the other thing is, worth pointing out about sponsorships is increasingly so they're sort of referred to as partnerships almost instead of sponsorships. Previously sponsorship meant you get a list of assets and rights that were pretty standard. The number of brands would be offered the same list. Partnerships are now a lot more kind of mutually beneficial. They're looking at how can both, let's say it's a brand and a sports property, how can they both mutually benefit each other? And by doing that, create a really specific set of rights that allows the brand to kind of, really use that platform to align with their brand and for it to kind of have a real shift in terms of the marketing of that brand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's one of the oldest forms of marketing around, almost like you're saying, back from gladiator days almost. And if I understand you correctly, it's sort of moving away from maybe a static version called sponsorship into a much more dynamic sort of two-way street called partnerships, more where sort of both sides pitch in and help craft something that's mutual beneficial. Would that be fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the past, brands were really able to utilize what that property was offering, whether it's sport or music. But nowadays, actually, brands are actually really helping that property also look at how they develop digitally or what they offer to their fans. And so I think that's what's been really exciting in the last 10 years, is actually by working more mutually, by working together, they can almost help, it helps kind of achieve the objectives of both the brand, but then also the rights holder as well.
Yeah, exactly. So both parties get something out of it. It's not just a one-way street, sort of trying to milk the value of a talent or a big brand. So
absolutely, yeah.
No, very good. And inside partnerships, then are there sort of different categories or types, or how do you sort of define the subcategories, if you will,
sure,
within this space?
Yeah, there are definitely different ways in which a brand can get involved, whether that's with an individual, so, an ambassador or an influencer. It could be with a team, whether it's a football team or another sports team. It could be with an event, so, a key moment, a tournament, a music festival, art exhibition. Or the other one is organisation. So that's where, in the UK, someone might sponsor the FA, for example, the Football Association, but it's or a league like the English Premier League. So you kind of have those four main categories, but then actually within those, you've also got different levels of sponsorship. So, from main leading partner, to technology partner, to supplier partner. So there are different levels, and those levels tend to then dictate the rights that you get and therefore the fee that you might pay. And it's probably worth saying, actually, in terms of partnerships, is it's not necessarily always, a brand paying a rights holder via monetary value. It can actually be a value in kind agreement as well. So, going back to this partnership and mutually beneficial, it could be that the brand is bringing to that rights holder, services or merchandise or expertise. And therefore, sometimes it's not necessarily money that's exchanging hands. It's actually this kind of value in kind agreement as well.
Okay. Oh, very good. So many different sizes and levels of fees and sort of structures, if you will. One thing we spoke about during the prep call as well. I mean, we live in an age of influencers, right? And whether they are streamers or social media stars or whatever they are, but the term influencer is very prevalent. So we spoke about it briefly, sort of like, there's sort of all this sort of big, hairy, very chunky kind of massive celebrities or sports stars or whatever. But there is also maybe let's say more individual led and maybe smaller, sort of easier to more accessible, I guess is the word for some of the influencer space. Like how are you guys working with that space today, sort of the influencer side of things, if at all?
Yeah, I think within sponsorship, both avenues, whether you're working with a kind of high profile ambassador or whether it's and you work with one big ambassador that's got global appeal that you can use across multiple markets, or are you taking a more regional approach and signing multiple influencers, and they actually, with them you might get more access to them, so they can maybe post on a weekly basis, whereas with a global ambassador, you're going to get maybe, you'd be lucky to almost get a post a month. I think the access to them is obviously more limited because of their profile and if it's a famous footballer, their schedule, for example, that's the things that you're kind of utilizing from them. But as a result, access is more limited. But both avenues work. It just depends what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's where, the brand needs to be really clear from the beginning about, why are they exploring partnerships and what are they trying to achieve? And how are they going to use it to stand out? And then I think they can find the right product. So is that a global ambassador? Is that 5 regional ambassadors, or is it many local influencers? I think gaming in particular, that there's a saturation of a number of industries within this space. And gaming is obviously one of them. In the UK, I think it's the second most prevalent industry across men and women's football, rugby, and cricket. So you've got all these, and I think in the Premier League, of the 20 teams, 8 have a gaming brand front of shirt. So you've really got to work hard to stand out, right? And I think the way in which you need to stand out is to find the right property, whether that's an ambassador, whether it's a sports team, whether it's a festival. You've got to find the right strategic fit that aligns with what you're trying to achieve as a business, so with your business and marketing objectives. Because I think if that's not aligned, then it's, to a fan, it's not really going to make sense what you're trying to do in that space. And and your messaging won't be clear and the value that you're bringing. I think, if we're looking at brands that, are trying to, explore ways in which sponsorship can match what they're trying to achieve or drive, an objective forward. BMW is a great example who, have always kind of, been within sports sponsorship or partnerships, but in a slightly more traditional space. But with the growth of esports, they've really capitalized on that industry. They now sponsor, I think it's 5 of the top 5 organizations within esports. But what they've done is really use esports to drive brand consideration amongst the younger audience. It's something that automotives are really struggling with at the moment, with things like Uber and taxi shares, and cost of living. The decision to purchase a car, isn't as easy as maybe it was when we were all younger. But they still need to engage with that younger demographic to kind of take them on that lifeline. And so they've really used esports as a way in which to identify with that younger audience and almost keep them front of mind. So when they're ready to make a purchasing decision, BMW might be at the front of their mind for that.
Yes, no, absolutely. And if we look inside of iGaming and specifically sort of B2C operators, so you mentioned PokerStars being one of them, but I mean, this might be very basic to you, but there might be some listeners that might not know it. So, I mean, why should B2C operators engage with sponsorships at all?
Sure, I think it's clear how sponsorship can engage with consumers, right? Because it's a captive audience. Nowadays with the fragmentation of viewing, of streaming, but actually, with a younger generation and what they want to consume live, or how long they want to consume content for, sports and music are really only one of the two of the few final things that actually consumers choose to engage with live. And I think what it offers is therefore this huge captive audience where fans are emotionally and psychologically engaged, and therefore when a brand associates with that, you get this liking transfer where the transfer for the fans, they transfer their liking from from that moment to actually a brand that's associated with it, and therefore passionate fans become kind of passionate consumers, and that's why sponsorship really can be part of a brand building strategy. So I think it's really clear how sponsorship works for consumers, but actually B2B it can work really well as well. Traditionally brands would use partnerships to engage with other businesses or their key customers through things like kind of hospitality, showcasing the brand, all that sort of stuff. But increasingly so, B2B businesses really need to be able to tell their story of their brand as well, and ensure that they're kind of sharing emotive details of their brand to ensure that actually on a B2B perspective, their customers are also engaged. And so we're starting to see really clever ways in which actually sponsorship is being used from a B2B perspective as well. Sage, which I don't, you might be familiar with, but a software company that kind of provides, I think it's sort of accounting and resource kind of support and planning. Over the last few years, they've increasingly, they're a big B2B business, right? And increasingly over the last years, they've invested in a number of sports, ECB 100 in the UK, MLB, so baseball in MLB baseball in the US, and Six Nations rugby. And that's really it. And, I guess what they're giving back is insights to those rights holders, because that's what they're able to do in terms of their software. But what they're getting back is an opportunity to tell the story about who Sage is, their history, what they stand for, but also experiences in order to engage and kind of treat their, their business customers, their entrepreneurs, and the people they're trying to target. So it can work really well on a B2B level as well.
Yeah, very, very good. So both B2C and B2B should engage in this. And I guess also, so again, just when I ask around inside the iGaming industry, at least, like there is this impression that sponsorships are very expensive and very costly, and if we don't have a massive team, there's no way we can make this investment and also be activated in a good way. Is that your view as well, or is there a medium and a small package available as well for these brands to consider?
Yeah, exactly. I think I can totally understand why people have that perception, because the ones that you read about are obviously, often the big ones. They can be high, and in an industry where it might be saturated with brands such as gaming, but also automotive, financial services, alcohol. If you're looking to invest in a big property, the investment levels are going to be high because of the value, to be honest, that partnerships, that these rights holders are delivering to these brands. But there are many other avenues to explore, and I think that's really exciting, especially now. I'm sure we've all been reading about the growth of women's sport, but if you start to look at developing sports, then that's an area which, hasn't had the demand, and therefore you're able to invest at a slightly more cost-effective stage. But actually, excitingly, you can be part of that sports story. So, if you come in early, you can be part of how you supported them, part of the growth story, and therefore that storytelling becomes kind of richer. But you can also look at ways in which you can maybe partner with just a specific region or a market. And then, finally, I think if you're focused on a certain property, let's say it's football, which, often comes with a higher investment level, then maybe you could look at different avenues such as a lower level. So maybe, looking at programs that are based within the community rather than at a national or a global scale. So I can totally appreciate people's reaction to that. But I think, there are many options of where you can find opportunities to invest at a level that's right for you. I think that's where you just, again, got to be really clear about what you're trying to achieve as a brand. And then that's where an agency, like Entourage or any other, actually knows the market so well, they can then look at those objectives and say, actually, guys, have you considered this? It's more aligned with your budget. And you're able to, it's a property you could invest in and actually could deliver against what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. And if we had to get a little bit concrete here, Katie, so I think, and just give the audience some sort of sense of budget required. So I think on the large scale budget, I guess there is no limit. At the end of the day, you could hire 10 A-list Hollywood celebs if you wanted to and go crazy. So let's look more at the lower side. So if you were to slice and dice and work with regional as opposed to national, et cetera, is there some sort of, is it possible to put some sort of amount on, if you will, that, from this point upwards, you can actually start doing something at a certain price point? Is there any sort of guidance on that? Or what would you advise a smaller company to start out with?
I know this is a very annoying question, which the audience probably doesn't want to hear. But it is really hard to provide that number because I think the way in which a partnership can be structured varies so much. If a brand approaches us and is looking for a partnership, really the first point is to understand what budget they have so that we can then go out to the market and find something appropriate for them. Because, even if you look at some big properties, like UEFA Champions League, one industry might be paying a lot more than another industry that's got similar rights, but that's because of the competitiveness or the kind of saturation or the demand within that industry. So even with the same property and the same rights, there's not really a set price. And that kind of is the same across everything. But then even, some rights holders are willing to offer, shorter term deals where they can maybe just roll out some digital assets over a few months, and therefore that could match their budget. And it could be a kind of a good kind of test and learn. So, I think what's really positive, and going back to that point I made earlier about partnerships now being, much more mutual, and much more of a mutual decision, and the rights holder often working with the brand, is that, they're open to understand what is the brand trying to achieve and actually build a package off that. So I think that's where, actually, as a first step, to be honest, understanding the budget the brand has, what they're trying to achieve, and then taking that and going to market and using, your internal team or an agency to help actually identify what properties could match that that's the way. So unfortunately, there's really not a set price that you can say someone needs to find. I think it just varies so much. I think the only thing worth noting, which it feels like brands often forget, is to make a partnership a success, you've really got to look at activation spend as well. So, I think for those, again, that might not be fully aware what activation means, activation is really about maximizing your partnership and the exposure you get from it. It's a way in which you use all the rights that you have in your contract to actually bring the brand to life. So I think once you sign the contract, some brands might think they're kind of there and it's live and it's a success and they've done the launch. But actually, activation is a really important next step to exploit and be able to communicate, what you're trying to do. So what I mean by how you can activate is that's via promotions, or it's via branding around the stadium or the festival. It's around hospitality, events that you might create, PR. But it's really important to recognize, I think, once you've signed a partnership, you do still need to invest and have budget to invest in activation, because that's what will really drive it forward. And again, there's not really a right amount as to how, a brand should budget for activation. It varies so much in terms of what they're wanting to do and for how long. But a really crude way of measuring is sometimes, if you're looking to do activate at a good level, you should really be looking, almost £1 for every £1 you spend on that contract should be put towards activation, is often what we try and kind of manage the expectations with our clients on.
Yeah. One-to-one relationship, basically, you're saying. So if you're spending $1 million on a talent, you should spend $1 million on activation as well. Is that correctly understood? I think
if they're really wanting to make an impact, obviously there's ways we can be smarter with that. As I mentioned, maybe pick out some key brand moments, whether they've got a launch coming up or a product coming out, and you focus on just those. So there are ways in which to scale that back. But I think going into a partnership and forgetting that actually you need activation spend, that's where the partnership can end up falling down.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you buy into the good old marketing funnel, I guess the talent on its own will only buy you reach and some eyeballs, if you will, and you sort of perhaps some brand associations, etc. But it's really the activation piece that starts getting this investment further down the funnel and closer to the purchase line of the consumer, so to speak. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Absolutely.
So if you don't have that activation side, you're literally just floating at the top of the funnel, and you're potentially very far away from actually seeing an increase or uplift in sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of some good examples to pull out, I guess, where brands have maybe done this well or not so well, and the impact that it's had. But I think trying to think of like what examples within gaming. Paddy Power ran a campaign a couple of years ago called So You Don't Think You're Special, which you may be aware of. It was a daily jackpot campaign where consumers could win on a daily basis. But what was really clever about it is they partnered with Jose Mourinho to be kind of the front of the campaign. They didn't just kind of sign Jose Mourinho and then just use him for some kind of key photos and everything. They used him throughout the campaign, in their adverts, how he posted about it, in store. But it was very clever because, I think what it did was really clearly explain what the campaign was about. So because there were these daily jackpots, because people could win daily, you didn't have to be special to win. So they were, that message was really clear. And then they utilized the personality who had trust, who was liked by some football fans. But I think what was clever is they've obviously kind of capitalized on, Mourinho and what he stands for. And, most football fans would be able to understand that, the link between that and the campaign, and that he was called the special one, or called himself the special one. And so it kind of added this kind of humorous value as well. But because they kind of used him throughout all different touch points, it just landed really well. And I think through the activation, it just made it really clear what the campaign was about, the benefits, but also kind of, shone a light on the brand Paddy Power and kind of that funny element that it has, and everyone knows them for so well. Thinking, I guess, of, an example of where maybe a brand hasn't got it so right, and actually going back to the activation point of, once the contract is signed, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of what is the messaging, what's the benefits, what's the value you're driving to fans. This is quite an old example, but Wonga, who don't exist anymore, but again, the audience may be aware of them. They were a payday. They're kind of a short-term loan company who charged extremely high interest rates. But they partnered with Newcastle Football Club. And, at the time they did it, Northeast England, was struggling with insolvency. And so it felt like a very poor partnership in that specific region. And actually what it, I think, felt like to a lot of fans is obviously the club just suddenly capitalizing on a partnership and wanting to take that investment, but not really thinking about what is the benefits that are being driven to both the brand and us. And so when the partnership became live, there was huge uproar, with a lot of fans actually starting to say they would not attend matches because of it. Local kind of government people were responding around it. So it had a really negative reaction. Yeah. But I think that's where they'd almost sign the contract and then not thought about activation and how that was going to land.
Yes. So there's a lot of work that goes into this to get it right, both from an ROI perspective, but also to make sure you don't actually cause a negative effect or hurt your brand either side of the fence, basically.
Definitely. Sorry,
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I know we've spoken about strategy and the importance of that to be able to find the right product. But I think when you set a strategy, the other things that can do is, outline some really clear goals. Are you trying to achieve sales or awareness or consideration or consumer retention? But agree on what those goals are and communicate them internally so everyone's aligned. And then, I think when that's established, then you collaborate with the sponsor on those goals you're trying to achieve so that you can identify a kind of set of rights that complement that. And before you kick off that partnership, it's important to have a really clear and consistent message that you're going to activate with, especially if you're a brand who's got multiple partnerships. I think it can become quite confusing to fans, especially sports fans. If you look at the F1 where, with so many brands featuring on the car or the driver's suits or the helmets, it's quite hard to understand what is the role that each of those are playing. But it's with a strategy that you can have this kind of clear and consistent message and ensure that lives across all your different assets. So the fan can really understand what is it that you're bringing to the sport and to them, and therefore why they should value you in that space. So I think, that's kind of obviously a key element to it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think going back to strategy and also actually going back to the definition of activation also to begin with. So I've always learned there's two ways of looking at this. So first of all, you have a brand, and a way of activating that brand is to engage in a sponsorship or a partnership, right? So you're activating the brand, right, through sponsorships, and then inside that sponsorship, you also need to activate that investment, if you will. So there's two layers of it. But I think, for me, if I should give one sort of visual on a partnership, it's a massive amplifier of whatever objectives you have. But the key point here is that you need to have extremely clear objectives, know exactly what you're trying to achieve before engaging into this, because otherwise, how are you going to find the right match? And what are you going to communicate through that partnership? It's going to become, if you have a mess internally, you're going to have an amplified mess, basically, and you're definitely not going to. That's how I see it, at least. So I don't know if you agree.
I totally agree. And I think the other thing is, if you don't have those objectives, how are you measuring it, right? So, measurement is such a key part of this. Partnerships can really make or break a marketing program. In light of the audience numbers, the platform that you have, they have such an impact. They can have such an impact on the marketing program. So you really need to understand what your objectives are, and then ensure you've got the data, timely access to data that actually helps you measure how is it working against those objectives. 10 years ago, when I was starting out, to see how much it's changed in terms of measurement and what's provided. Previously a rights holder would, deliver data or results. It was often kind of inconsistent and often quite delayed. You might get it 2 months after a season finished. So you were never really able to adapt to what you were doing during that season to react off it. But I think what's really exciting is, the advancement of tech has just made data so much more readily available, and therefore has really helped measure this industry. I think that's one of the things that people used to hold against sponsorship is, people would say that you're just measuring awareness, you're just looking at the number of eyeballs that might be watching a match, and that's how it's measured. But it's definitely not that anymore. Some of the campaigns I've worked on, with PepsiCo and UEFA Champions League, they're able to drill down on data that actually shows when they're running an on-pack promotion, how that's being driven because of their UEFA Champions League partnership. Even with a car purchase, which, I think the car purchase lifeline is 4 years. But even some of the automotives have managed to explore ways in which how they can identify how a certain partnership has actually helped drive a car sale. So it's really exciting what it can do. But yeah, I guess you have to have those objectives so that measurement can then track the effectiveness of them. Measurement can then also provide insight into the different activities that you're doing, so you can understand which might be working harder than others, allowing you to maybe scale back some of the ways in which you're activating during a season or a moment. It allows you to kind of really optimize the sponsorship and just provide a complete picture, on how the sponsorship is performing, and against the objectives that you set.
Yeah, and talking about pushbacks, right? I mean, that's the second pushback that I always hear, right? So number one is it's too expensive. Number two is how do we measure it? Like how do we know if this works or not, right? So speaking on the measurement piece, so you mentioned that the rights holder can potentially help out with some of the measurement piece, but I guess the vast majority of the work sits within the brand that invests in a partnership, or maybe also, how do you as Entourage, can you help out with the measurement piece, and how does that work?
Yeah, you're completely right. You get some data from the rights holder, but ultimately you as a brand, how you like to measure your own brand. If you look at, when I've worked with gaming brands, obviously they track things so much more regularly. And actually, you guys are pretty sophisticated in how you measure and track. So what makes sense is actually you look at your partnership and you integrate that into current tracking processes that you have. But it does massively vary. I think depending on business goals, audience budgets, how you measure and what you do. But a lot of that does, ends up sitting with the brand. There's certain information you can get from the rights holder, but it does need to be driven by you. But I think the key thing with measurement, and we've spoken already really about, the funnel, but ensuring that you have an overview of the full funnel so that you can really understand the right type of value that you're driving, but also the impact across awareness, engagement, sales, all through the funnel.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Very, very good. I was going to say, I think also an important aspect on measurement is obviously the time frame that you use to evaluate a partnership, right? So I think if you're if you invest in a large partnership and just expects immediate sales on the bottom line the following week, maybe you're missing the mark, so to speak, and there's so much more to a partnership and over the medium to long term as well.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up actually when we were talking about strategy, because I appreciate that the approach in terms of how long you might partner with something, is very much dependent on the budget that the brand has. But long-term partnerships, that is something that at all the agencies I've worked at will always recommend. I think shorter-term ones as a way in which to test the water or to, learn from, can be a really useful experiment. But I think if you're fully committed to a partnership and you want to see results, you need to really look at how you can do it long term, longer than a year, really, because effectiveness grows over time. And so that, it becomes more cost effective over time. But going back to the measurement point, it's therefore you can track real results when the fans have actually got used to you being into the space and they're aware that you're there and they can see what you're doing. It's really only over time that you can really understand what's the true value that you're delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. So even though we can slice and dice and let's say make partnerships less scary and sort of more digestible in terms of budget, would it be fair to say that you definitely still need to be able to see, don't engage in partnerships unless you're willing to have at least sort of a year window, so to speak, where that partnership will grow and you're willing to measure the effects over the long term. If you're expecting to see effects the next month, partnerships is probably not the right tool in your toolbox for you. Would that be fair to say, or is there a way to achieve very short-term goals as well through partnerships?
Say in some instances, if you're looking at the bigger properties, the bigger global properties, but again, going back to there being different options for the different budgets the brands have, there are also, I guess, different options in terms of the length that they're able to invest into that. So, if they're actually running a digital campaign and they work with a club, a lot of the rights holders have become smart in terms of actually offering shorter term partnerships, but it's often in a digital space because you can kind of track those results so much quicker. So there again, if that's what they need to, if that's the brand consideration, then a partnership can be shaped for that. You can run more shorter term ones, shorter term deals. And I think also, when we were talking before about budgets and looking at maybe a more regional approach or even a lower level approach, again, sometimes those can complement a shorter term partnership. But I think if you're looking to do something global with a really big property, that's where you really need to allow the time so that you can actually really understand what's the true ROI.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Okay, very good. And I guess also that's where Entourage comes in, right? I mean, I think a lot of if I understood you correctly, Katie, you kind of sit as almost part of the in-house team or an extended extended team effectively, and help the brand both to set the strategy, understand what they're trying to achieve, measurement, etc. Could you talk a little bit more sort of the day-to-day of, so if someone wanted to get involved in partnerships and speaking to you guys, how would Entourage help that operation, so to speak? How would you sit in the day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what an agency like Entourage offers is basically a group of people who are expertise in the space. So whether the brand is new to partnerships or even whether they've been in partnerships for a while, but they just don't have the manpower to drive things internally. Because a lot of, going out to market and finding the right property, then activating it, it's time consuming. But if you can use an agency where you're just tapping into some of their time, it becomes quite a cost-effective route rather than you needing to employ a whole team of people to do it for you. But I guess in terms of Entourage, we offer commercial partnerships where we'll go out to market and strategically find, partnerships which fit with that brand. We have a talent department as well, which exclusively looks after the commercial rights of a number of athletes, and then we've got our partnership management division, which is obviously where I come in. And what we're trying to do is almost support our clients through every stage of the kind of journey. So we can, so often our commercial department might get a brief from a brand, which is based obviously around budget and target audience and maybe target markets, what they're trying to achieve. And then they'll go out to the market. They've got a knowledge already of what deals are, available, which ones might be coming up for renegotiations, and so which might be open in a year or two. They've got all that knowledge, so then they'll share that with the brand and work through maybe what partnership is best for them. Then when it comes to the activation part, we've got a talent team who can really help them identify, is talent a way in which to support that campaign and help push it on further. So we can either offer, the talent we represent, or we actually procure for a number of global brands. We'll go out to market and procure that talent. And then my department will come in to basically, when I talked about activation, that's what we're doing, is really helping them maximize that partnership to ensure they get the best exposure from it and that they really utilize all the rights they have. So I guess if we're looking at what we kind of do on a day-to-day basis, I think if I pull out an example, Parimatch have a number of football club partnerships and other partnerships, but they sponsor a number of teams in the Premier League. But they also last season had Juventus, which we managed that partnership for them. And they were using it as a way in which to drive kind of brand knowledge, awareness amongst the new audience, and then interest and demand in new regions, but then also loyalty with their existing audience. And then what we did for them on a day-to-day basis is actually our commercial team negotiated that partnership for them, and then we came in and managed it. So that is everything from, weekly calls with Juventus to make sure, the rights are being delivered as what we require, that we're aligned on certain ways in which to use the rights. If there's a newsletter coming up, for example, is our messaging aligned with Juventus? It doesn't clash with a campaign that they might be running? They had access to players for shoots, so we'd help them manage that. They had kind of a number of kind of week social posts around each game. So we'll come in and just manage that entire process with them. Parimatch has quite a extensive internal team as well. So often the support we give depends on, what the brand needs. But we help Parimatch with all of that. And then I guess at the end of the season, help them wrap that up and look at, what's worked, what hasn't, and how might we therefore want to adapt it for next season.
Yeah, and that must have been a quite expensive partnership, that one. I know you can't mention prices, of course, but Juventus can't be cheap.
Well, I think all I can say is when you've got the Entourage commercial team building it and driving it for the brand, they're going to find ways in which to support the brand with making it as cost effective as possible.
I love it, Katie. Very good, very good. Okay, and you also mentioned a smaller sort of mid-size case. If you want to take us through that one as well. Yeah,
are you referring to Olibet?
Yes, Olibet, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So another one of our partners. I think it's really exciting to see what Olibet are doing and how they're growing in the Balkans. They are. The Olibet Entertainment Group is very much positioned as an entertainment business, and they're looking at how they can use their partnerships as a way in which to kind of gain access to content, so that they can be seen not only as the leading gaming provider in the Balkans, but they can see that they're this provider of content and they're an entertainment business. So 2 seasons ago, they partnered with Luka Modric, who most people might recognize, but is a huge, world-renowned football star who plays for Real Madrid in Croatia. And they partnered with him, which again, this is where our talent team helped to go out to market and find the right talent for them. They then negotiated with Luka, and then we now manage that partnership. But they wanted to find a talent who could build trust with new audiences and drive loyalty with current audiences as well. But I think the other thing that, was key to the strategy behind Olibet's approach was they were also expanding into Croatia, which they did, I think, in 2021. And so they were really looking at how they could use talent as a way to, deliver on the objectives I mentioned earlier, but actually really support with that expansion into a new market as well. And so with that partnership, again, we manage it on a day-to-day basis in terms of we're the kind of middleman between Luka and the client, ensuring that Luka delivers on all the necessary rights, but actually when we're doing content shoots with him as well, that everything's approved ahead of the shoot so it runs smoothly. And then on the shoot that Luka's delivering to everything that he's agreed to do. But I think it's been a really exciting one for Olibet. It was their first brand ambassador. And, I think going with someone so high profile has seen great results. I think they had a launch video, which was just put out on YouTube, had 44,000 views. They get on average kind of 74,000 impressions on Facebook. But otherwise, they also have used it really well as an internal engagement kind of piece as well, which I think is, often that internal engagement piece is really important to consider because it's really beneficial as well to the brand. And so what Olibet have done is looked at how through signed shirts or personalized videos or kind of meet and greets, how they can use Luka as a way in which to engage with their employees, especially around that Croatia launch and how they could engage with the Croatian employees.
Yeah, well, that sounds that sounds fantastic. And when I hear you talk, Katie, it just sort of it's just so. Don't underestimate how much work there sits in working with partnerships, right? And this is of course where Entourage can help out, but also just in general for the brands, like as in it is not just signing a big check, right? Well, you can, but you're not going to get any ROI on that, right? So there is just a tremendous amount of work sitting in activation and working with the talent, working with the rights holder, like you're mentioning photo shoots, if you intend building videos or merchandise around it, in-person events, access to exclusive stuff. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So you better have a very strong in-house team or partner with the likes of yourselves to maximize that investment, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes, like so many businesses, it's a real relationship business, right? So whoever the brand partners with, it's really important to have a good relationship with that rights holder or that talent or whoever it is, because that's where you're both going to kind of go out of your way to really drive value from it. And I think that's where an agency like us can really help with that, because we've got the time to really focus on it on a day-to-day basis. You know, often we're working, the marketing teams we're working with, brand side, have so many responsibilities on their plate that this, the partnership is a really small, a small element of their day-to-day job. And so where we can take all that time-consuming work off them and help them ensure that the relationship is really positive, and therefore, better value can be driven from it. That's exactly what we can do, and that's where I think our value kind of really shines.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. You also mentioned a non-gaming case study, effectively, with Vodafone, I believe, if you wanted to share that as well, maybe.
Yeah, because when we caught up in the preparation call, I was saying that I think it's really important for gaming companies, or to be honest, for any brands, to look outside of their industry and see what other brands are, how they're activating, how they're partnering with different things, and learn from them as well. And when I spoke, in Malta on the iGaming panel, I was talking about Vodafone because I think all the different kind of business functions reflects quite well, I guess, what's happening, the business functions within gaming. And so I was just talking about how, at a previous agency, I was working on Vodafone's partnership with British and Irish Lions. And they were using that property as a way in which to increase brand awareness, which, to be honest, in the UK there and Ireland, everyone's pretty aware of Vodafone. But it was to really look at non-user consideration, and I guess demonstrate what they're capable of as a business, demonstrate their role through the sponsorship, for example, through kind of connectivity. And when we were working on it, it was just in the middle. It was just when COVID had kicked off. So interestingly, there were all these rights agreed, and then a lot of those rights had to switch to kind of digital assets because experiential, on the ground, all of those sort of assets just weren't possible. And again, going back to kind of being close with the rights holder and have a good working relationship, that's where if things have to change, you don't have to abide normally you would have to abide to a contract, word for word. But if something so unusual happens, like COVID, then through that relationship, you can work through ways in which you can activate that they're happy with and you're happy with. So they created an official app. They had like a player-led content series, and they used Vodafone tech to look at kind of player performance. But it was a huge success for Vodafone and British and Irish Lions. They had the most downloaded app ever, and for Vodafone, they had I think it was a brand affinity uplift of 83%, so it was huge. But I think another thing that really stood out was that there were these multiple business functions, and from sort of day one, they were very much aligned about the partnership and could work together to drive that value. So we used to have kind of steering calls and then a kind of a committee. So all the comms were kind of managed in a really process-driven way. But I think it was about 12 business functions that we worked across with the Vodafone partnership team. And it was kind of comms, media, social PR, Vodafone Business, Vodacom South Africa, obviously Vodafone Ireland, retail app, online, VeryMe rewards, and I think internal comms. So it was just such a huge part of the business. But as a result, as an agency, we had to really play a role in helping them as a business align and organize themselves so that they could all work together on driving the value of the partnership forward. Yeah,
wow, what a setup! But clearly with good results. So that was working fantastically for them. It sounds like.
Yeah, they've recently announced a partnership with Glastonbury for this year, which it's an old agency, so I'm not involved with. But I think it really helps demonstrate that the partnership is obviously working for them because they're now investing in kind of in more partnerships.
Yes, very good, very good. Oh, fantastic case studies. Katie, this has been tremendously valuable to myself. I've learned a lot. I hope the audience at home as well has. Before we stop, I'm going to try my luck again a little bit, Katie, here to see if there is. Can we? I don't know. I'm going to push it. Can a brand with a small setup, can we get started with £50,000 in partnerships, or do we need to go to 6 digits to sort of get started? So anything you can say there? What's the threshold to get started with something?
Don't think that any amount is too little. If 50K is what you've got, then working with an agency, you can find a solution that might deliver against that. So it might be that it might be that it's a regional ambassador deal. It might be that it's a number of influencers. Yes. It might be that it's just a very small element to what a rights holder does. But any starting point is possible. So, don't rule yourself out if the budget is 50 or less. I think there's ways in which you can find smart solutions to allow you to, be able to still find a property that you can activate with.
Let that be the last question and answer here for this podcast, Katie. Thank you so much. If people want to get in touch with you, Katie, or with Entourage, what is the best way to do so?
Sure. Well, you're more than welcome to email me directly. My email address is ks@entourage-global.com. But conscious, I'm also going on mat leave soon, so in case you get no response. We're very prevalent on LinkedIn, and you can hit up any of us on that. We post quite a bit on Instagram to kind of demonstrate our work and what we're doing. But then obviously, we've got a website, which is entourage-global.com, where you can kind of send a message. Please get in touch and use any of those avenues.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Katie. So thank you so much for your time, and especially 2 weeks before having twins. That's insane. So I wish you all the best, and can't wait to see if they listen to this episode to fall asleep afterwards or something. All right. Very good,
Perfect.
Katie. Have a fantastic day, and hope to see you soon.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Michael. Great chatting to you.
Likewise. Take care. Bye-bye.